Hey, this is Mark from Solar Games, and today we're going to talk about my predictions on what Mark Rosewater means when he says that everything's going to change, or big changes are coming after March of the Machines aftermath. So, if you haven't heard, WotC has already announced March of the Machines, which is the set that's coming after Phyrexia All Is One, and then there will be a mini set called March of the Machines Aftermath, which is kind of like if you remember like the old block structure, they would have a full set and a small set. My guess of that set, by the way, is it's going to be a mini set, meaning like instead of a full set of about 300 cards, some reprints of course, but that size, we're going to have a mini set maybe about like 100 cards or so. But apparently it's going to be standard legal, so it's going to go right into standard. Don't know what that's going to affect product-wise. But the really interesting part is on his blog recently, he mentioned something like after March of the Machines, I think actually not on his blog, he was answering Q&A, something about after the March of the Machines, big changes are coming. And somebody asked like, hey, is this like gameplay or story? Like what part of it? And he says, yes. So meaning both. What are my predictions? So I think obviously the story, the lore will have to be rebooted. They're talking about basically the whole multiverse will be changed forever. We have Lord of the Rings set coming in the summer. So it does seem like the whole idea into 2023 is that the multiverse of Magic is going to be expanded. Now, does that mean that Magic is now going to be inclusive of all multiverse? Like, okay, so like Warhammer is now part of Magic because it's just another plane. I don't think so. I think that's a little bit like also kind of boring. It's not really anything novel or new about that. It's just kind of like, right? The story, of course, will change, right? So I suspect because Teferi's kind of going back time, fixing what happened on Dominaria, fixing what's happening on New Phyrexia, and potentially just maybe changing everything that happened with the invasion of the Phyrexia. Maybe that's changed everything back. So now the whole timeline of Magic is rebooted. Could Magic, after 30 years, have a reboot of some sort? Possibly. So I think the story element, my guess, my take, is going to be it's a reboot. Meaning, because the timeline has forever been changed, there is the old, your standard canon, like for 30 years timeline. And now, because of what Teferi has done, there will be a new timeline. And they might even start back in the beginning again and then kind of move forward. This will give them a lot of opportunities to go reprint older cards. So I suspect some of that is coming in the future. Kind of just my guess, wild ass guess out there. No like data on this, right? But the more important part is like, what do they mean when they mean like the game mechanic is going to change, right? Other things about that. I suspect, right, we haven't had a major rule change for a while, but I suspect there's going to be some major rule changes coming. Like, remember, Magic, the way Magic works has not always worked this way. And there has been pretty major rule changes or differences that have been, added in that made the game a little bit easier to play. So, if you're old school, like, from a long time ago, about like antes, about mana burn, about damage on the stack. And the way the stacks worked in general before was totally different, right? And these things confuse the game, so they went ahead and changed the rules. So they would have new edition of the rules that would rectify all these things and make it either simpler or just work differently. I think one of the challenges with Magic, being that it's a game from the older generation, is that it really has this problem with mana, right? And being mana screwed or flooded always feels really bad. And a lot of games that are new, current, have kind of solved this problem. Hearthstone, for example, just gives you free mana. Every turn you get one, and that's it. I mean, there's probably cards that can give you more. I haven't played the game for a long time, by the way, so I don't remember. But I think you always just got one extra that turn. I think there's cards that probably like manipulate mana flow. A different card game, Shadow Era, that I played a long time ago also, did it this way, which every card is a resource. So you can either play the card or use it as a resource. So you couldn't be mana screwed because, well, you had all the cards and every card could be used as mana. And it depends on how many cards you have in hand. The way that worked was you would have cards in hand, and every card you can turn it upside down as a resource, and now it became mana. But it's permanently mana. It can never come back. I'm sure they design cards in the future where maybe one of the resources can go back into your hand, but effectively it becomes a resource and it can never come back as a card. And so you would tap it like you would tap mana. And of course, in that way, you could never be mana screwed. And at some point when you didn't need more resources and you wanted more cards, every card draw was, not a land, effectively. My guess is actually Magic is going to take this opportunity to rectify the mana screwed issue. It's it's a super bold statement, right? And I have, again, no facts to back this up, but we're just having fun guesstimating what the future looks like. But my guess is this is one of the biggest weaknesses of Magic today, and it may be one of the biggest opportunity for Magic to really change and become a, current generation, next generation game. Now, there's a lot, we can talk about this all the time with players. There's a lot of ingenuity, creativity that goes into actually understanding how much mana to put into the deck. So by taking out, in some way, fixing the mana problem, you've taken out another aspect of deck building. But I think in some ways, though, it also has created a better, a less random game. So I think the more professional, competitive players would appreciate a game where they don't lose because, again, they just drew the wrong hand, right? And then you also have the added benefit of potentially not having people cheat on this element, mana weaving, these other things that people do could potentially not be a problem in the future if, mana doesn't matter the same way it does today. Now, what does that mean for the cards though? I don't know, because it sounds like if they're going to take out mana the way it works today and change it somehow where most of the time or all the time in the game, it doesn't, you're not going to be mana screwed, either flooded or not have enough. I wonder if the cards, some of the mana cards, will have to be changed as well to how they function. Maybe there's a separate deck that you draw from, where you draw from mana deck or you draw from your main deck, right? Maybe you shuffle your lands deck and you shuffle your main deck separately, and you take cards from them each for the initial draw based on, let's say you take 3 and 4 or whatever, and then you can choose to draw from one of the two decks, maybe with some detriment or whatever. So there's a little bit more guaranteed of mana, but at the same time, you're not, you don't always have, you still randomness, meaning you don't always have the mana you want. You could still technically get the wrong one, or if you want a dual land, you could still just get a basic, those kind of things. Now, it does drastically change how searching for mana works, but I think it's interesting, right? Because it could, for example, consistently guarantee landfall. But then I guess maybe we're really screwing the game a little bit, because if you have good landfall creature out, you can continue to draw from the land deck, and then, So I don't know. I don't know what that means. My other guess of what big changes are coming is that we're going to see a new card type. And I think this one is going to be similar to enchantment, but different. So a lot of other games, they have this kind of idea of like Pokemon has this idea of stadium, or other games have this idea of a world, right? So I think Yu-Gi-Oh has this where it's water, darkness, ocean, whatever, and it changes the field, and it makes it so that certain monsters or whatever have better effects, other ones have weaker effects. I wonder if something like that is coming to Magic, where you can change the multiverse, meaning we can be on Dominaria. Think Plane Chase, right? Dominaria. And if you're on Dominaria, these things are happening. If you're on this other plane, these things are happening. But instead of being a planes deck on the side, actually be a main deck, meaning I can cast a card. I can change the field. I can change the plane that I'm working from or playing on, and we'll take both players there, and that affects the game somehow. And this will be a new card type that you have to have new removals to deal with. And so in some ways, if you're thinking about it this way, they're creating a lot of new cards that you now have to kind of add, because your old removals won't work for these new cards anymore. So that could be another really interesting element too. Anyways, it just proves to me more that the creative team at Magic is still probably working on fun, interesting things, and they are not stopping, which is great. I just wish that we just don't heavily market everything too much. And also we don't push the products out there so much that it erodes the value of the cars. In fact, maybe creative should work more on, I don't know, making foils that don't curl. Get R&D on that right away. All right, Mark, see ya.